recruitment, and eventually you're going to have one that is selected. I think I was right there when I was explaining before. So you have this recruitment, this phase here that we call recruitment. This phase here that you call then selection. No big deal. It's pretty self-explanatory. You have a bunch of follicles being recruited. Eventually, one of them will be selected. Any follicle that goes through this and eventually is selected, it is capable of ovulating. Okay? This is how I draw ovulation for whatever reason. Okay, so that the little ball there is just the oocyte being expelled. Okay, so this stuff is what you end up having is this is what I call the unit that forms the estrous cycle. Okay, this is what you'd like to have. This recruitment phase. Remember, we even tried to guess what is the hormone that is most likely to control this?
All the ones that you learned so far.
Follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so again, at some point you feel in doubt, just read it loud inside of you, and you're gonna get it. Okay, so eventually, what happens then is that during this selection, FSH becomes less important, and then LH tends to be the driving force for the final, or for the second phase of the development of this follicle. Okay? Who controls these guys here? The mother of all of them. Which is the one? LH and FSH are produced where?
Oh, the anterior.
Anterior pituitary. So before then, which one is that the one that stimulates FSH and LH? GnRH that is then produced in the hypothalamus. In this case here, and that's where, part of that idea of knowing some of those. Do you remember when I showed one of the first slides on the hormonal processes, like places inside the hypothalamus with different centers? At this point here, what you have is one of those centers produce this GnRH here. Okay. The GnRH from the hypothalamus goes and stimulates the anterior pituitary to produce FSH and some LH. Okay? The FSH here is going to be extremely important to start the recruitment of those follicles, and eventually you're going to have the LH that will continue. And then you say, but Ronaldo, what's the next question that has come from you? How the heck that happens? Why all of a sudden one was chosen? I remember some of you here probably asked last time, what was the driving force there, and what makes one follicle being selected? And I think I answered that, sometimes it's because during this recruitment, sometimes I think one of the best guesses today is that one of them is a few hours older. That's it. Does it mean that, all of those, and that's the other thing, all of those, the other ones, they die? This action of dying, we normally call atresia. Okay? So up to this point, the interesting thing on the development of this estrous cycle is that everything that you're controlling is the follicle. The oocyte is like a passenger in the first class. It's there. Just take me where I should go, and that's it. So the rest is done by the follicle development. Nice. So GnRH, LH, FSH, portion. What do you think why do you think, okay, so I mentioned there that maybe some follicles are a little older. How do you think this selection can happen? If I just said that, up to a certain point, LH is the driving force of that dominant follicle. And by all means, we're giving the example of species that ovulate only one. If we have pigs, dogs, the only difference is that you're going to have more follicles being recruited and just more becoming dominant. Okay, this is the other thing that is very common for us to call. Once this thing being selected, we call this the dominant follicle. Okay, the other ones we call subordinate follicle. So if I mention here and there while I'm talking, is because that's what it means. Basically speaking, again, so go back to the question. So how do you think, just guess, what do you think would be a reason for that follicle to then thrive on LH? In order for one hormone to work, what the cell has to have? Receptors. So eventually what happens is that follicle acquires receptors for LH. The rest, they have the potential to, but they don't. Now you would say they don't. So in this case here, all these follicles here, they have FSH receptors. Eventually, only one of them will start having receptors here for LH. Okay? And that's why they can start feeding this guy here, and this guy can keep growing. The other ones are no longer. Okay, next, nice question. That's how we're going to go. So you're saying that this one here is FSH dependent, but then LH is going to be like this. But your next question, what happened to FSH? What do you think happened to FSH? Because not only you have to acquire LH receptors, if this guy here doesn't change, one thing that would have, the meaning of that is that maybe the other cells lost receptors for FSH, even if FSH was high. This is how I think you guys should be thinking, because now we're going to go into a very complex series of, negative feedbacks and eventually even a positive feedback once it comes to ovulation. So this guy here, FSH, eventually will have to, and what is going to happen is going to go down. Okay? From what I've said so far, and I understand it's kind of, lost in many of the previous classes, what is that this dominant follicle starts to produce? That I mentioned before. I know the classes, but we're putting together stuff. So what is the stuff that the granulosa cells synthesize? Estradiol. Yeah. And by all means, you said it right, it's estrogen. Estrogen is a bigger class that encompasses estradiol, 17 beta, estrones, and so it's a bigger class. But you can call in class and during test, if you put estrogen or estradiol, that's fine with me. Estradiol, perfect. So this guy here is actually, so we're talking about hypothalamus, pituitary, gonads. It's all close here, but we're talking about very different places in your body. This guy here is starting to, yay, let's produce estradiol. Sometimes in books, or eventually I might write, that we call estradiol E2, okay? Just because of the disposition of certain residues in that cholesterol backbone, we call E2. So this estradiol, if you have to guess, what do you think is the effect of estradiol in the pituitary hormones? have to go back there. So it's starting to produce estradiol. It's producing estradiol here too. Estradiol, estradiol, estradiol. What happens, which is a very, very clever solution, as this guy starts to produce more estradiol, this guy here has a very strong negative feedback on FSH. So this guy here starts to produce something that drives the FSH that would be required for these other ones to keep growing. So this guy here, even with FSH going down, can survive. Why? Because now he depends on LH, not FSH anymore. See? Super sneaky, super crazy dominant follicle. No, it's a very clever solution to basically have this follicle dominate, select, and basically kill the other follicles. Okay? Nice. So we're gonna go there. Starts, I don't know where, have a GnRH, F8, FSH, LH. So Ronaldo, what happens to estradiol and LH? He also has some negative, but it's a lot smaller on LH. This is like super negative. This is a little negative. But the stuff is like the follicle does depend just on a little bit of LH. You know, normally those hormones they have what we call a pulsatile release pattern. Okay, as many other hormones. Most of the hormones in the hypothalamus and pituitary are done this way. Estradiol is not. Estradiol have constant all the time. So this thing, when you have like this difference in negative feedback, what you have is like, this is a constant release. Okay, so it goes circulation. These guys here, they are like this. That's why it's very common in reproduction, when we talk about the control of these hormones, we talk about amplitude and frequency of these hormones. Because if you collect, for example, right now, a blood sample from any of you, and you say, oh, Ronaldo, can you tell me if my GnRH concentration is high or low? It's going to be unreliable. Maybe you are. I collect your blood sample here. And this happens several times a day. Or you can go here and collect here. And you say, oh, you have pretty high. It doesn't mean anything, because what you're trying to measure is actually pulse frequency. Okay? And this pulse frequency, the idea and the reason why I mentioned the pulse frequency is that it does have, and maybe now we might go a little like just superficial on this, but when you talk about control, serious control, precise control of the estrous cycle, that pulsatility is super important, because you can have very weird reactions to how you control the estrous cycle, and it's based on the differences and the pulsatility that you do in these hormones. Okay, so this is the, as I told you before, this is the base. And let's say, no, it doesn't. Little guy here, never ovulated, but it's awesome. It's there. Okay, so based on, and I think one of the things that I told you before was that in order for ovulation to occur, in the class of, I just mentioned the physical stuff on ovulation, and I mentioned one word there in this slide that I said that the peak of LH, or the surge of LH. And this term, the surge of LH or peak of LH, which is preceded by a peak of GnRH as well, it is the major trigger for ovulation. This is what causes ovulation. So this guy is super dependent right now on LH, but LH is in that, No, a little bit here, a little bit there. But what you do need is almost like something going super crazy for a few hours and down in order for ovulation to occur. Now, I'm telling you that estradiol, and this guy here, as he grows more and more, estradiol will increase. Theoretically, it will go up and up. But Ronaldo just told me that FSH and LH go down in terms of frequency. Now it comes the point or the importance of you understanding the different centers in the hypothalamus. Because what happens is that, yes, you do have this, which ultimately speaking, you do have also, here some this. You have directly in the pituitary, but you have also in the GnRH here, caused by estradiol, negative feedback. What happens is that at some point, this estradiol here reaches a certain threshold. Is this threshold similar, somewhat the same range for every person or every animal? It's not. Quite dependent. But it reaches a certain threshold. And this threshold tends to be one of those all or nothing kind of reactions, the same way that, for electrical impulse inside the cell is an all or nothing kind of reaction. And once that reaches a certain threshold, this very, very high estradiol actually causes a positive feedback on GnRH. The only thing is that GnRH has a center that we call pulsatile and one that we call pre-ovulatory. So this is what happens. It goes down, it goes up until it is going up. It has a strong effect on FSH. It has some negative effect on GnRH and LH, but that LH that is circulating is enough to keep the dominant follicle going. It keeps producing estradiol, Eventually, it triggers a different center in the brain. Once it reaches that different center, you have a flood of GnRH. So this thing that was going like this, eventually it goes like this. Goes all the way to the roof, back, and then it goes again. This guy here, imagine this, I know, pretty bad, goes to the roof and back. This is what we call the peak or surge, that's the other word that is normally used, of GnRH. That will then cause a surge of LH. And is actually going to also cause a very high amounts of FSH going up. But what's most important here for ovulation is that once this peak and this surge of GnRH, LH occurs, this guy here then ovulates. So this is the what we call the central unit of what the cycle is made of. Okay? So this is FSH, recruits. Eventually, one of them or a couple of them develops a little more and acquires LH receptors. This follicle then starts to produce really real amounts of estradiol. This estradiol goes to FSH, kills the other follicles. This FSH then goes down. The little LH that is circulating is enough to continue to sustain that dominant follicle. Eventually, that dominant follicle produces enough estradiol that goes to a different center, the surge center, the pre-ovulatory center in the hypothalamus, and you have that flood of GnRH that causes a flood of LH that then causes ovulation. So all the other things that we talked during ovulation, you remember the thinning of the wall the contraction of some of the fecal cells in order to expel the oocyte from inside the follicle, it is caused by that guy there, by the peak or surge of LH, which then you're going to understand in the fertilization class. It will also be important to synchronize sperm cell motility and the release of the egg. Lots of functions for that. Lots of things will happen because of that. Nice. Oh, Ronaldo, that's pretty easy. That's so cool. So where the heck is progesterone, prostaglandin? Where the thing?
For the negative feedback on the LH and FSH, does it like extend the frequency, like make it less frequent?
Make it less frequent and lower amplitude.
Okay, so the entire level.
The entire level goes down, correct.
But it's always there.
It is always there. There's always some.
Okay.
Okay, so you have what is very common for people to, or in books to say basal levels. And basal levels, and this is, I'll be honest with you, it took me a long time when I was a student to start putting this together in a little more, in a clearer way, is that you cannot come here. If you want to know what is your GnRH concentration, I have to put a catheter in you and collect samples every 15 minutes. Eventually, after some hours, and you probably have to collect for 4 or 5 hours, eventually you're going to have some peaks. And then you say, oh, it has the frequency X with the amplitude Y. And this is your pattern at that point. When it comes to the LH, and when we do experiments and we would like to have this, we have to go in the cow. We do it, our lab, we do it in the cows. We put it in the catheter in the cow, and we have to open the little faucet. More blood, every 15 minutes until we have a pattern. Okay. Somebody had a, no? Sorry. Not excited about more questions. So that's the part here then becomes, is that all? From what we talked so far, what are the other hormones that we haven't? You see how this is more complicated than the male? Male, there's nothing. It's zero. Useless people. Okay? So this is the stuff. You know, this is much more complicated. Now we have to add another layer of complication to this. What are the hormones we have not talked so far? Go back. Think about it, all the classes we have during this first 2.5 weeks. Prostaglandin, awesome. What other one? Also starts with B. Progesterone, very good. So progesterone and prostaglandin. Based on the classes we had so far, what happens once that follicle ovulated? Now, we're going to have one class that is going to deal with this guy, fertilization, embryo development, blah. Okay? What happens to the ovary? We mentioned that several times. Corpus luteum formation. Okay? So this corpus luteum is what? This little follicle here, imagine, is inside the ovary, exploded. That thing became something, mushy, whatever. You have blood coming in. This peak of surge of LH also acts in the remaining cells. And all of a sudden, this thing starts to take form into a regular, actual, not fluid filled-like structure like the follicle, but an actual little gland, transitory gland. Okay, this is then the corpus luteum that we normally, very often call the CL. Okay, this guy here, the corpus luteum, will then start to produce progesterone. Very often often, we call it, or we write as P4. Very good. So, the very famous, so what? How this is going to add to my life? You know, something worth of knowing. You may, you know, imagine that you're at some point producing estradiol. Let's say your estradiol levels at this point here, close next to the ovulation, it's like super high. You destroy that structure. This is what happens to your estradiol levels. So next time, when people complain, what happened to your mood? It's that. Okay? Part is that. Why? Because it's too abrupt. It is actually in matters of hours. You have this sudden drop in estradiol, and eventually you start to form this guy here, where your progesterone levels then starts to rise, you know, slowly but surely, it starts to go up. Nice. Very, very good. Now, let's go and let's continue in this other board. Let's go back to leave progesterone aside for a second. Once your progesterone or your estradiol goes down like this, what happens to the whole system? Go back to point 1. If your estradiol goes down, what goes up? Your FSH. If your FSH goes up, what happens? You recruit more follicles. Another cycle starts. Okay? So once that happens, your estradiol goes down, your FSH goes up. All of a sudden, oops, you have a new cohort of follicles being developed. Once that happens, repeat the cycle. Okay? Now, this is unit number 2 of your ester cycle class. You have all of this except for one thing. What it is that was not included in the first phase of the ester cycle explanation. What is different? What is this? How this unit here that I just explained different than this? Your progesterone, 2 points. Nice. Okay, your progesterone. Now your progesterone is into play. And now things get messy. Nice. It's awesome. Okay. So you get this, FSH. So the best thing for you guys to put this is like, write down things, draw things a few times. Eventually that becomes, because you see, it's a bunch of switches that goes on from the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the gonad. And very soon, it's going to be the uterus together. Damn it, all the males. You see, it's ridiculously more complicated. Okay, so this part here, you have this. Eventually, you have selection. Eventually, you're going to have, the recruitment. Eventually, you're going to have selection. You're going to have some dominant follicle. This FSH was up. Eventually, this guy here starts to produce. So you have estradiol. With your estradiol, your FSH goes down. Very nice big brother. Kill all the other ones. Okay? Since he killed all the other ones, you say, yes, now this is ready for prime time, is going to ovulate. No, it won't. It won't because of this guy. Okay? Where do you think progesterone acts majorly? If you have to make, or to, if you have to, so if you have to make this follicle or this not to ovulate, where do you think progesterone will act? On LH. And in this case, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to, right now, estradiol had like this big effect on FSH. Some in LH, but big effect on FSH. Progesterone is the opposite. It's a small effect on FSH and a ginormous effect on LH. If you have poor LH pulsatility, concentrations, let's say level at this point, if you have that, what then happens to the follicle? Okay, let's go back. If when estradiol was produced and you have this big negative effect on FSH, what happened to all the little brothers? Subordinate follicles, little brothers, same thing. Okay. Stop. What is the name? Atresia, became atretic. In this other case, once you have the LH being stopped, have the pulse, what happens then to the dominant follicle? Become atretic. Okay? It dies. Perfect. Okay? So this guy here, that was a superhero here, ovulated, yay, nice. This guy here starts to have the same fate. Okay? All the, different screen. So, have the same fate of the other subordinate follicles, little brothers. The only thing that it happens a little later. Very well. You have that. Stopped, phase number 2 of this astrocycle class. Nice. What happens then? The cycles do not stop. Once you reach puberty and those things go, it goes. It goes, it goes, it goes. Even before puberty that happens, but never, the only difference is that never reached ovulation before puberty. Okay? Then after puberty, because you do have cycles and stuff, the only thing is that you're not mature enough to ovulate. After puberty, you start ovulating. This case here, explain to me hormonally what's going on. You see that we have to be careful. One is the hormonal changes, the other one is the follicular changes. They go hand in hand, but some of them are dependent on the follicle. Some of them are dependent on your pituitary, indirectly on the follicle. But I started there, we came here, we have a new player, progesterone. Not good for ovulation. Awesome. What happened? What happens now? Stop cycling. Never cycle anymore.
The corpus luteum regresses. And so there's
You will. Very good. 1 point. Nice. But before that, do you think follicles here just stop developing? What came down once this follicle died? Nice to hear. It's estradiol. Estradiol goes down. Okay? Estradiol goes down. What goes up? U cohort starts. Ronaldo, what the heck with the progesterone? What happened to that mother? Okay? These guys are dependent on what? So FSH. So you have the FSH. Is too dependent on progesterone? No, because it's not that much of a problem. So you do have recruitment. And you end up having a little bit more, actually development of this follicle. The only thing is that if this progesterone continues to go up or reach a certain plateau but at a high level, that follicle will always do what? Always die. Not enough LH, it dies. It dies, estradiol goes down, FSH goes up, another follicle recruitment, it goes. If you leave progesterone up, either because of a pathology or because you put a patch or you took pills or you have, implants like we have either in humans or domestic animals, you continue with that forever. So you never ovulate. Very good contraceptive method. Never ovulate. Now, what was the other hormone that we were missing? Prostaglandin. Okay? So prostaglandin sometimes we call just PG, sometimes we call PGF. This is the actual technical name, prostaglandin F2 alpha, but prostaglandin PG, it's okay, for the class. This guy here, who produces that? The uterus, the endometrium, awesome, crazy. So now you have the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the ovary, and now you have the uterus in the middle. Okay? How, now you go back to your anatomy, first class. How is this, what was one of the structures that we said that is super important here? Yes, flexiform structure. That, will bring the prostaglandin from the uterus directly to the arterial circulation of the ovary, and then this will go. So at that point you can say, oh, so you will produce prostaglandin at some point. And it is true. This is what happens. Eventually, and we're going to talk about the timing of this in probably next class, but eventually this prostaglandin here is produced. Same way, prostaglandin is, you have in circulation there all the time. What happens is that eventually this thing here goes bananas. It is produced a lot more frequently. This thing here, this kind of pattern, is what okay, and kills the CL. That's why they call it a luteolytic hormone, because it causes luteolysis, or the lysis of the corpus luteum. It kills not only structurally, but functionally the corpus luteum. Eventually, that little gland there will actually physically disappear, but even before it disappears, it stops producing progesterone. So this fella here that was like, but eventually this will be produced, and your progesterone levels will go down. In 24 hours, it will come down. Another abrupt change in steroid hormone concentration in the case of female estrous. Okay? So once this happens, your progesterone goes down. You kill the negative feedback on LH. This follicle becomes super happy. Can you see? Happy. Super happy follicle. Okay. And ovulates. Nice. So this is the complete cycle. This is what you would say after the ovulation here. You have the progesterone goes up. You have, so Ronaldo, can you have like multiple follicular waves during one cycle? Like wasting all of those follicles? Yeah, you can. Depending on the species, you can have 2, 3, 4, 1. It depends. It's not that, it's not for us, it doesn't matter, like we don't have to be that specific about which one it is, but it is super important that you understand that this, then, it is your actual estrous cycle. Now, we have tied up a lot of the hormones that we're talking. Even when you go back to some of your classes, you're gonna say, oh, it depends on LH. This is almost central. Sometimes I think even to start the class with this, but then it doesn't matter how you start, it's always messy, okay? So the stuff is, this is a few things that we're gonna talk next class is about the actual control of this a little bit more, because you know, why this then becomes a central part of the class. To emphasize that, okay? Because this is going to be key for pregnancy. Of all these things here, we're gonna add another layer of complication further in class, which is, so Ronaldo, what if we have a baby there? The baby will have to block that. So progesterone continues, and you're going to see that progesterone is pretty bad for ovulation, but progesterone is pretty good for the baby. Okay, so then we'll move on. Very good. Excellent. Thank you.